Lovie Smith is back as an NFL head coach, and good for him. But I just question a little bit whether or not he's really going to get a fair chance this time to again try and reprove what he can do as the leader of an organization. This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Today's episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at GetUpside. Just download the free GetUpside app and use our promo code Touchdown to start getting 25 cents per gallon or more cash back when you fill up your tank with gasoline. On the show today, we say hello to an old friend. Lovie Smith, now head coach of the Houston Texans. We'll kind of look back on what his tenure was like in Chicago and what we kind of remember about the good and the bad and what that then sort of projects forward to Houston, where we'll kind of touch base on the weird dysfunction going on down there with the Texans and this whole head coaching search process and the Josh McCown thing and the Brian Flores lawsuit. And then I think we'll wrap up by actually hearing from Lovie Smith on some of his thoughts on this process and becoming the head coach and his philosophies, building his staff and all these different things that I think it's kind of a nice sort of warm and fuzzy reminder of what it was like when Lovie Smith was running the show in Chicago. Because when Lovie Smith was running that show in Chicago, right, he was a successful NFL head coach. I mean, he and Tony Dungy were the first black head coaches in the Super Bowl, right? To play against each other and to have, that level of success and to be able to, advance their teams to their respective progress that we saw. And not that the Bears were a perennial powerhouse by any means, but still the most success we've seen a Bears coach have since 1985, right? I mean, that speaks for something. And, it always seemed to be at least hovering around that mix, right? The first season was 5-11 was the worst they did. They never really were bad, right? But they weren't always really great. You finished with like a 56-ish% winning percentage. And as you kind of look back, of course, you think off the top of your head right away, you think of the Super Bowl, and then you think of like, some of the NFC Championship game run and a couple of other playoff appearances. But for the most part, they did tend to finish, 7-9, 8-8, 9-7 with some 10 and 11 win seasons in there. And I guess, they didn't end up doing much worse than 7-9 other than that first opening year. But like that could be a really valuable stability for a team like the Houston Texans that really just needs to like calm things down a little bit and right the ship at the very least. Of course, you don't hire Lovie Smith to win 7 games. You hire whoever you're going to hire as your head coach because you think they can take you over the top and start pushing you towards the Super Bowl or whatever your goals might be as an organization. But still, it seems like at the very least, he should be able to do some of that. Well, I mean, things obviously didn't go that well for him in Tampa Bay, but kind of a weird situation there. But maybe also a weird situation in Houston. We'll get into more of that, the Houston stuff, in just a little bit. But when you think back to his Bears tenure, of course, I think the defining characteristic of the coaching staff was the offensive coordinator issues and, moving on from, Ron Turner to Mike Martz to Mike Tyson, all the different kind of combinations they had there, some pre-Jay Cutler, some with Jay Cutler, and certainly didn't have great quarterback play, maybe ever, or at least not for very long stretches. I think that got better when Cutler came there, but the offensive line play got worse, and it seemed like the offensive coordinating got worse. They did always have pretty consistent running games from, Thomas Jones to Cedric Benson to then, Matt Forte in there. They were able to be a pretty consistent, obviously great defense. Maybe that's, when I say first and foremost about Lovie Smith teams, I guess first and foremost I said offensive coordinator. I guess that was thinking more of first and foremost the issue that comes to mind because, of course, first and foremost, he coached a great defense, a Super Bowl caliber defense, a defense that played at among the league's best for what felt like a decade. I know the math doesn't add up. It was more like, 7 or 8 years in there, but still, like, that defense was a stalwart of the NFL. Everybody knew, regardless of what was going to happen when you played the Bears under Lovie Smith, that they were going to have a really good defense. They were going to be tough. They were going to be physical. They were going to be disciplined for the most part. And they're going to go after the football, right? I mean, they were a turnover-generating group for the most part. They practiced specifically, ripping the ball out when the second player gets there. First player kind of is there to tackle. Second player is there to get the ball out. And, of course, the peanut punch and all the different turnover seasons that we saw from guys like, Tim Jennings having a big season, or Nathan Vasher earlier on. I mean, we just saw a wide variety of players being able to have success, in part because of the largely foundational pieces of Urlacher and Briggs and Tillman and all the guys from that era. But, still, they were good defenses and overall fairly good football teams, despite, Jerry Angelo had some real first-round busts in there. And, of course, they traded, was it 2 or 3 first-round picks in the Jay Cutler trade off the top of my head. So, it wasn't like Angelo was constantly reloading the Bears with, new, highly successful first-round picks. They had some pretty big free agents moves that they went out. I think about the Julius Peppers signing in particular, but they were not afraid to sometimes go out and at least try and make some waves in free agency. Certainly in inheriting for Lovie, the playmakers like Urlacher and Briggs and Tillman and being able to ride them for a long time was definitely a big part of it. But more so that it wasn't as though Lovie was given this great team and either had success or didn't. But he wasn't given an awful team either. But there was a mix of like talent and then mistakes from the general manager and the team building process. Of course, I think too, we might underestimate just how it seems hard in hindsight to underestimate just how valuable the special teams were to the defense and offense and the success that they did have. Like, of course, we think about Devin Hester's touchdowns and all that. Of course, it was hugely, no one's underestimating how much special teams got them to the Super Bowl in 2006. But I think we might not properly value how much special teams in terms of field position and kicking away from Hester, even in the later years of Lovie Smith, still continued to really help this team. So you wonder, how much of that was just purely Dave Toub, how much of that's going to be translatable. But I think from a coaching staff standpoint, they are going to put, it's a mentality that they value special teams under Lovie Smith and that they're going to put a lot of emphasis on it. I don't think he has a special teams coordinator picked just yet, but those are so many different things we remember back to with Lovie Smith, and curious to see how that's going to translate in Houston, because, certainly plenty of Bears fans didn't want to fire Lovie Smith in 2012 when they went 10-6. And, you still hear Bears fans that would bring back Lovie Smith was a real thing we heard this off season before the Bears hired Matt Eberflus. But instead, of course, the Texans giving him his third head coaching opportunity. It's a weird spot for Lovie. It doesn't seem like it's necessarily set up very well for him to be successful, and you wonder just how genuine of an opportunity this is for him. We'll kind of circle through some of what's going on in Houston and how Lovie might be able to try and handle some of these wider issues next on Locked On Bears. Today's episode of Locked On Bears brought to you by our friends at GetUpside. It's an incredible app for anybody who buys gasoline. GetUpside gives you cash back every time you fill up your tank at the gas station. You just download the free GetUpside app in the App Store or Google Play, enter in our promo code TOUCHDOWN, and you're going to get 25 cents per gallon cash back on your first fill up. Don't pay a full price at the pump anymore, especially the way oil and gas prices are kind of peaking again and getting really, really high. And I don't know. Give yourself some relief in your paycheck, in your wallet, in your bank account with the GetUpside app. Some people who drive a lot make as much as $200 to $300 in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right into your GetUpside account, and then you can cash out at any time. If you want to do a direct deposit in your bank account, you can go through PayPal if that's easier for you, or even cashing out to e-gift cards to online retailers like Amazon and others. So download the free GetUpside app. Enter in our promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back when you fill up. That's promo code TOUCHDOWN when you download the GetUpside app. I want nothing more than to see Lovie Smith have another successful run as an NFL head coach. I like the guy personally, and it seems like a good dude, a quality coach who I was, easy to like in Chicago, and just fun kind of seeing him get that head coaching role again. It just doesn't feel like Houston is putting him in any sort of position to be able to be successful with just how much of a joke of a head coaching search process this ended up being for Houston, the type of team that Lovie Smith is inheriting, and just the sort of the feeling around the organization. Just, I have my doubts as to whether or not anyone, I don't want to say anyone, but like whether or not Lovie or most coaches could be truly successful in this team, in this situation, because it really feels like pretty clearly that Lovie Smith was not their first choice, was not even really on their radar until all their other choices, or all their other top choices at least, pretty well fell through. And then it was like, oh, well, I guess Lovie's still in the building, so we should just, I mean, he's been a head coach before, a successful head coach that we talked about, but still, let's hire him. And it just doesn't seem like it's been a very, well executed process. And then since then, the Houston Texans have done everything they can to try and spin it and make it seem as positive, as intentional as ever. But like spending last week down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, everyone knew. I mean, every year at the Senior Bowl, certain NFL rumor things kind of spin and circle pretty widely among the group, and like everybody knows, the Texans were pretty dead set on hiring Josh McCown. They really legitimately wanted to hire Josh McCown to be their head coach. They were all in on the former backup quarterback, former starter for the Bears. Well, he's Jay Cutler's backup, but started games for the Bears under Mark Trestman. Of course, Josh McCown was a good person and a decent quarterback, but has never coached football before. Has never called plays before. Has never run any sort of team before. Has never been a coach. He's just a retired quarterback. And the Texans were really set on hiring him and may still want him to be their head coach someday. But the rumor feeling was that like they were just like too scared / embarrassed to do it. That they cared too much about perception. And good. Like, they shouldn't hire Josh McCown to be their head coach. It would be a stupid move, but it's very clearly like that's what they wanted to happen. And then also they wanted Brian Flores, and then Flores drops the lawsuit, and so then they back out of that. Then the other one was the Eagles defensive coordinator Gannon, and he was kind of like, nah, screw this. I'm not dealing with any of that stuff. And all of a sudden they're left like, ah, crap. All of our candidates are gone. Who's left? Here's Lovie Smith. We'll interview him, and boom, he's got the job. And like, again, I don't blame Lovie Smith for taking the job. There's 32 NFL head coaching jobs, and he wants to be a head coach and may very well be a successful head coach in Houston, 100%. Like, it's not a knock on Lovie at all, but it's just a knock on Houston, and wondering like, is he going to get a fair shot? Because certainly, David Culley walked into that buzzsaw last year, and he didn't get a fair shot, right? I mean, I think, yes, the Texans were not good last season, but I think they did even a little bit better than we thought. They didn't even finish last place in their own division. Right? I mean, they won 4 games, same number as the Jets, same number as the Giants, and more than the Jaguars and the Lions. I mean, again, not that it was a successful season per se, but like no one looks at that team and says, you know what their problem was? That head coach. Fire that head coach because he's no good, and that'll fix what was wrong with the Texans last season. Like, of course, when they fired David Culley, we were like, oh, of course. He truly was just a placeholder candidate so they can go out and hire Brian Flores or whoever they really wanted. And you know what? They missed out on all those guys that they really wanted, and so they're left going back to another placeholder. Like, is that what Lovie Smith is just going to end up being? A different David Culley. It just seems like it just doesn't seem like it's like a real, like, genuine desire and process to get him there, because no other teams were particularly pursuing Lovie Smith. He didn't interview for any other head coaching jobs. It wasn't like he was some hot candidate. And again, this is not an anti-Lovie Smith position by any means, but he struggled pretty majorly in Tampa Bay, and then was the head coach at Illinois and failed there pretty spectacularly. And you could say, well, in both of those spots, they had really bad rosters and didn't really have quarterbacks. But I hate to break it to you, Houston has a really bad roster and doesn't have a quarterback. I mean, we don't know exactly what the Deshaun Watson situation is going to yield when it's all said and done, but it doesn't seem like it's going to end in Houston either way. And then Tyrod Taylor's a free agent, and they have Davis Mills as their 3rd-round pick last season. So, like, this is not a situation that's set up for any coach to be successful, let alone Lovie Smith. I can see from Houston's perspective the selling point of some of the continuity and just the consistency of Lovie Smith. Again, the criticism here belongs to Houston and not any of these coaches individually. But you could, if you compared, if you were gonna try and take the Texans sort of perspective on it, when they hired David Culley last year, he had never been a coordinator before in the NFL and had only been a position coach. He was technically assistant head coach with the Ravens, but he came in very sort of inexperienced to be a head coach, right? I mean, he's mid-60s, so he's not an inexperienced coach, but like he was maybe a little bit, I hate to say underqualified, but like it was not a veteran experienced coach. And whereas Lovie Smith is very much that veteran experienced head coach who has a lot of that, like he just knows how to run an organization. Very much that sort of CEO type who's going to be very hands-on with his defense, but just is literally the very calm, steadying voice of Lovie Smith, which I miss. I do miss hearing that. And so like you can see where it's like, okay, the locker room, especially the defense, loves and trusts him, and maybe Culley wasn't the guy, and Smith can continue some of the things that were working well under Culley, but then also put his experience into it and his flavor and do things his way, and maybe get them to 6 wins instead of 4, and move things forward just a little bit more. It's just a question of like, well, Culley was still able to get more out of Houston than we thought he was going to be able to. So how much more is Lovie going to be able to get out of Houston? I mean, they still have an offseason here to try and rebuild and fix that roster. It just seems like they have a long way to go. And will Lovie Smith get a leash, right? I mean, David Culley got 1 year. How many years is Lovie Smith going to get? If they secretly wanted Josh McCown, or not so secretly, really wanted Josh McCown, and maybe still do want to make him their future head coach someday. There's also talk that Pep Hamilton, as their offensive coordinator, could be grooming him to take over as head coach before too long also. I think Lovie will get more than 1 year than like Culley did. I mean, I think he'll get more than one, but does he get two? Are they just hiring did they hire Lovie just thinking who the next coach is going to be after him, right? Or does he get the chance to actually prove what he's going to be able to do? It doesn't seem like a very good spot for any coach, but I'm happy for him, and I really do want him to be successful because it's just I like Lovie, and it was fun going back through it, and I watched his opening press conference there with the Houston Texans and just hearing him talk and reliving some of that same kind of feeling that we got from him in Chicago. We'll hear Lovie's thoughts on some of the progress he's made as a coach and in terms of building out his staff, maybe in some of the ways that didn't always work out all that well in Chicago, but Pep Hamilton, one of his former Bears assistant coaches. We'll kind of go through that whole situation and where the Flores thing fits in there a little bit there too. Next on Locked On Bears. We're just a few days away from the big game this weekend, and if you don't have your bets in, don't worry. It's not too late. You got to check out our friends at BetOnline because they've got you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as the playoffs continue all the way up to this weekend's big game. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news really throughout not only the football postseason here, but the rest of sports because it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. So even when you're not getting any of your Bears football right now, you can still make your sporting events that much more fun with maybe a little bit money down and getting all your betting advice from our friends at BetOnline. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers they have for 2022 and in through the rest of this year. It's all at BetOnline, where the game starts. The timing of the Lovie Smith hiring in Houston is so interesting as the NFL deals, and really the Texans specifically deal with the Brian Flores situation firsthand, but also more general as we're seeing that impact the rest of the NFL in terms of minority hires. I mean, you look at the Chicago Bears, right? Hiring Ryan Poles as a person of color as their general manager, and to be able to have those type of people leading the organization, like these successful people of color working their way up and earning these opportunities in the ways that have been so difficult for people that look like them to be able to get, especially in the NFL in the past, where it's always been a very white old boys club running these organizations and then hiring the people that look like them. But as we see more general managers in these situations, and now, Lovie Smith getting another head coaching job to add another black head coach in the NFL, because at the start of this hiring cycle, when Culley was fired, we were down to just one with Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, of course, we add Mike McDaniel with the Miami Dolphins, and I think we're still figuring out exactly what the rest of the league is going to look like here moving forward, getting more of these potential opportunities now with Flores, suing over it and making a big deal out of it. And so, of course, with Flores interviewing with the Texans and then no longer getting the job after the lawsuit thing, that's been sort of all floated up here. And of course, Lovie's not involved with any of that, but he made some really, I think, poignant points on, what he sort of, or how Lovie himself has taken this to heart, through his career, and how he's sort of trying to lift people up with him. Particularly, I think, Pep Hamilton, who was the Bears quarterbacks coach under Lovie Smith early on in the Lovie Smith era, and has sort of gone on to be successful in other stops, and of course helped develop Justin Herbert with the Los Angeles Chargers, and now he's tasked again with this Texans offense and trying to get things up to speed a little bit more there. And I thought, Lovie's, I think, handling this really well, and I think very much creating some opportunities for more people of color to advance farther in the NFL and create a more diverse set of coaches that match the diversity of the players that play for them.
This moment is pretty special. It's not often you get a chance to lead 3 professional football teams. I don't know if there's a guy that looks like me that's had an opportunity to do that. So that's pretty special. But just what I know about the organization and the potential. As you look for players, you're always talking about the potential that you see in an athlete. Just to lead a program like this, I know the potential on what we can do. And we kind of started the process this year.
Ed Werder with ESPN, and I have a question for each of you. Lovie, I'd like to know your take on what you just said. Nobody who looks like you has coached 3 different teams in the NFL. What's your take, given your experience on the Brian Flores lawsuit against the league?
Well, I don't know enough about the laws. This is what I can speak on. I realize the amount of black head coaches there are in the National Football League. It's Mike Tomlin, and I think there's me. I don't know of many more. So there's a problem. It's obvious for us. But after there's a problem, all right, what are you going to do about it? There's a lot of different talk on how and what you should do. But I think it always comes down to action a little bit. And I know one person that wanted to do something about it. It's just not about the color of your skin or who you want leading a program. But I know Cal and Hannah, of course, they said this is what maybe there's a problem, or not maybe there's a problem, there's a problem. This is what we're going to do for it. I'm here. So, and what we're doing, and it's just not about me being here right now, on how head coaches are selected a little bit. A lot of it is, a lot of offensive coaches are leading their programs right now. 2 Super Bowl participants have guys that have made their living with offensive football. I understand that. Well, I know as we go forward a little bit, I see Pep Hamilton right here, and I see his color, and he's going to be calling plays for us. And maybe it's about getting guys in a position for people to see exactly who they are and what they can do. I understand the problem, and I know the Houston Texans are doing something about it to make it better.
This is the kind of thing it's going to take to make NFL coaching staffs and NFL management more equitable, to match not only the demographics of the players in their league, but even many of their communities where the teams play, and of course where they where the players come from early in their careers from high school on up. It takes more general managers of color to hire head coaches of color, to hire coordinators of colors and assistants of color who can then build up to become future coordinators and head coaches. Because we talk a lot about how many minority head coaches there are, but there are only a handful of black offensive coordinators and only a handful of black quarterback coaches in particular. That pipeline tends to be particularly white. And so to have Lovie Smith being able to, as he said, give those guys the opportunity to show what they can do is so valuable and progress. It marks very real progress in the NFL. I just circle back to the original point here about the Texans in particular. Yes, Lovie says give them the opportunity to show what they can do, and they can then prove what they can do, and they'll continue to get those jobs. But is Houston going to be that opportunity for them to show what they can do? Will you look at what the Texans offense does this year if Davis Mills is their quarterback and they're throwing to, Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins, and who knows what their backfield's going to like. Rex Burkhead, right? I mean, the Farrell Brown at tight end. Like, they have a chance to bring in guys, but like when these coaches in Houston have an opportunity to show what they can do, are we really seeing what they can do, or are we seeing a reflection of whatever the mess is in Houston? And then say Lovie struggles here, or Pep Hamilton's offense struggles in Houston, then does that stick with him? Did we look back and say, oh, well, Pep Hamilton was really good with the Chargers at Herbert or whatever, but then his Texans offense wasn't very good. So is Pep Hamilton that good of a coach? Like, in hindsight, sometimes we forget, or we don't apply the context necessarily. And sometimes we just can't tell from the outside either, how much was the coach versus how much was everything else going on. And so I hope they're successful with those opportunities. I hope they get this chance to show what they can do and prove themselves again, and earn themselves future opportunities and give other opportunities to other people that look like them to be able to make the league more equitable. It's just, I really have my doubts about Houston, whether or not they're getting a fair shot, or whether it truly is just like, here's some other coaches we can fill in here while we wait for Josh McCown to get more experience, or while we wait until, next year when the next coaching cycle is there and we can pursue different coaches that we actually like better, and then cast aside these placeholder coaches that we have now, and really not giving, again, these coaches of color an opportunity that can be so difficult, or has historically been so difficult for them to get in the NFL. And now that they are getting it here, but it's not always the same opportunity as white coaches and historically those coaches have had throughout the time in the NFL. So it's something, right? It's a step forward. It's better than them not getting the job, right? That they took the job for a reason. They want the job. They would rather have the job than not have the job. They're hard jobs to find, and it represents some amount of progress for them. But I'm curious to see if this Brian Flores lawsuit situation, even if it doesn't actually go to court all the way or go to trial, what other types of ripple effects that might have here. And I'm curious to see, too, in Chicago, what Ryan Poles does as a general manager of color, and as he builds out the rest of his front office. And of course, this Bears coaching staff has plenty of coaches of color coming in as we've learned more about some of these assistants. We're going to learn even more about these Bears assistants on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Bears. I believe Thursday morning here, as you're listening to this podcast, we'll have our first press conferences with the new offensive, defensive coordinators and special teams coach, and we'll hear from them and what their plans are for this Bears team, plus so much more. So I hope you'll keep tuning into the Locked On Bears podcast, because we're here for you 5 days a week, wherever you get your podcasts, plus on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, the Locked On Podcast Network is on scene at Super Bowl Radio Row, interviewing former players, media members, coaches, etc. And the Locked On NFL podcast is all over the big game. If you want, Locked On Bengals and Locked On Rams as well, breaking things down for both the teams. So we have plenty of great local sports coverage. Your team every day is the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, if you're listening to Locked On Bears, that means the Chicago Bears are your team today and every day. And I hope every day that the Locked On Bears podcast is making it easier for you to bear down.